Welcome. This is abrupt. This is different. This is not my usual setup. I'm currently on holiday in the land of the free here in Washington State. They dropped a ban list, a real ban list for once, not just a restriction list full of all kinds of, beating around the bush restrictions, but actual bans. So, Bushiroad today on Friday, what was it, 23rd, I think? Or 23rd of August, dropped the restriction list for both standard and premium. They delayed this because they initially were supposed to release this on, the Tuesday that they promised, so that was like 3 days ago. And so they delayed it. We still don't really know why, but they delayed it, probably because they were considering some stuff last minute. And so now it's out. And I woke up today, this morning, to see it, and I was like, damn, they went ham. Like, they actually went hard on this. They didn't just like mess around with a couple of restrictions. They straight up just poofed some decks out of existence. So let's take a look at it. So first things first, the standard stuff, only one deck got limited, and I think it was pretty obvious which deck was going to get limited, even though it's been dropping in popularity and in like showings. It's still been topping very consistently. That's obviously Bermuda. And so the fact that this deck has been topping and doing so well for so long is obviously a bit of a problem for Bushiroad, because any time that someone goes like, oh, I want to build a new deck for competitive play, they get told, oh, just build Bermuda. Everything else is good, but it's not Bermuda. And so this restriction is really good. I don't think any other deck needed to be restricted just yet. Like, obviously people are saying like Lukier is really good, Mordred is really good, but it's not like they're like, groundbreaking crazy, the best deck in the game kind of thing, so whereas Bermuda has always been sitting as that, and so that's why it's been a bit of a problem. And so the restriction is that you cannot use Lizelot and Sonata in the same deck. Now people were thinking, what kind of restrictions could they do to Bermuda? They could do like, oh, you can only use Caro or Sonata, or only like up to 4 copies of both Caro and Sonata, or something like that. But they went with the much easier option, and I think the more effective option, which is just turn down one of their they have like volume buttons, and so they turn down one of them basically. It's either the bass or the volume, and you choose which one you're going to turn down. And so it's interesting because I think without Lizelot, they lose their early game. Their only early game now is Sierre, and they do not have they can't do like Lizelot into Sierre or like Lizelot into whatever. And so Lizelot turns off the early game quite considerably, making other decks they don't have to sweat from turn 1 as much as they did originally. Whereas Sonata, obviously if you don't play Sonata, the whole deck just crumbles. The reason why they did this, I think, is so that when they do a new Bermuda deck in Standard that's not Colorful Pastral, they're going to be able to let you still play the Lizelot there at 4 and still, have that strong early game, but with different cards as the late game. Whereas here you're losing that early game of Lizelot, but you're able to still play Melody and still play, the aggressive Melody shenanigans that they always do. And so it's interesting because I think the deck will still be very good. I don't think it's going to be as insane as now because they lose their early game, which was one of their strongest parts of the whole deck. And the free plussing that Lizelot gives is just insane. Even if you check the trigger, it was always insane. So losing that early game is huge. And so I think it'll go down to tier 2. I think it's still going to be very viable for tournaments. I just don't think it's going to be the deck anymore, which is really good. That's how it should be. So Standard side looking very good. Obviously, they made the one hit they needed to, and everything else in Standard is pretty much fine. As I said, Standard is in a pretty healthy state right now, and so this just made it even better. So that's all good. Now, Premium. Oh boy. There are some questionable things in the Premium part of it. Some things I'm very glad about. Some things I'm kind of did you really need to go this far? So let's break it down. So first things first, OTT. New Ichi just banned. Not even restricted to one, not even you can only use this or that, or an errata, they could have also done that. It's just banned. This is, I don't know. On one side, obviously, it's nice because this is a very unfair card in the sense that it felt like out of all the premium collection strides, this was the one that went too far. And so, obviously, it's good that they kind of rectified it, but I feel like what they could have done is just errata it to maybe be GB2 so that you can only second stride it. And then you put OTT back to this pool of, well, now you need to be able to, like have a good other first stride before doing this, or like you can only use one of the abilities. Like let's say like the guard restrict is only on GB2, whereas the other skill is on first stride or whatever. But so completely banning Ichi is interesting. I know a lot of people are happy, obviously, because the deck is pretty damn insane and like the first stride kill is crazy and it's just way too effective. Obviously, some people are pretty mad because they invested and they searched for hot stamp Ichikishimas, and then, some people got back into premium just because they were like, oh, OTT is good again, and so for people like that, obviously it's not good news, but for the general competitive player base, I think it's a pretty good thing. Magical Calico, I think, is random and unnecessary, unless this is like a safety restriction so that like the cards they release in the future don't go too crazy, but I think this card is not that good. It's good, like, as we've seen from Ryo Gyoza, but that's the one list, and if Bushiroad used one deck list to decide how OTT will be restricted, I think that's a bit problematic too. So I've played against a lot of Ichis lately, like OTT in premium, and not that many of them use the Magical Calico, so I don't know if this was that necessary, honestly. Like, I don't know, the Calico limit I think will be lifted very fast, because I think Bushiroad themselves will realize like why was this even there, because I just feel it's not necessary. I think it's the one restriction in here that's just like, why did you even touch that? Like, such an unnecessary restriction, I think. Then Criff is dead. That's one thing that people have been whining about since Worlds. Obviously Azel did have that kind of like unfair part of it where it's like, well, you only need to draw into the Bowmains and the whole deck just kind of, steamrolls. Whereas now you're in, like, as Solemn said, you're in the standard pool where you have to draw both the Azel and the Bowmains, and it's not as easy to do everything. But I think honestly, the deck doesn't like worry too much about it, because Hazel was already falling back into this like less high rolly deck, into this more like, play out the game, create 2 game if you need to even, and then it's like you had really nice plays with the Spear X and everything. So I feel like honestly it's just the Azel limit again will hurt the deck, obviously, because it's not as consistent anymore, but I don't think it's dead. Honestly, I don't think it's dead. I think it's still gonna stay around. It's gonna change, but yeah, like, I don't know, because now having to draw into both cards is pretty rough. But I mean, if they just play the deck a bit more standard-like, then it's going to be still very strong. But I don't think it's going to be a tier 1 pick anymore. It's definitely going to go down to tier 2, maybe even lower. But I think it's still pretty solid in that sense, regardless, for tournaments. So at least there's that. Then this one is the one that I think is kind of like why, which is the Nubatama restriction. So you can't use Shiranui Rinne with Jamio Kongo in the same deck. This I really don't get, because this deck has little to no results, barely if anything, and it feels okay, it feels pretty strong, but it doesn't feel that crazy. Like, it's not that different from what the deck was already doing just because Jamio Kongo is added, and it's not like it was topping every tournament. It's not like, the other 2 decks we just talked about, like Azel and OTT, those decks, they were dominating tournaments. Whereas like Nubatama, not really. And so the fact that they already made this restriction before Jamio Kongo is even out in English is kind of odd. I mean, obviously you'll still get to play Jamio Kongo with Rinne until September 20th. That's when this restriction list goes into effect. But the fact that they did this already seems kind of weird, and I'll talk about why this is weird, just because, like I said, the deck has almost no results yet. Like in Japan, obviously in English it can't because the card's not out yet, but yeah, I feel like they should have waited on this a bit, like waited until the deck gets results. Like, unless this is like, they're afraid that the deck will be too good after this restriction list, like maybe that's why they restricted it. Maybe that's why this list was delayed for so long. Although honestly, I think it's just been delayed because they couldn't decide if they want to fully ban Ichi or not. But yeah, I don't know. This one feels weird. I think this will also get lifted at some point, just because the combination of the cards isn't that crazy, I think. Like, it's good, but it's not like new Ichi levels of good, like as one card to boot. So that's why this one, I'll come back to this. But last one, before I forget, obviously Bermuda is a very big spotlight on this restriction list in both formats. So in premium, Ellie is now banned. I think that this was kind of like, we kind of saw this coming, just because Ellie, even at 1, can be recycled over and over and over again, and it's only like, the only cases where that doesn't matter is against decks that swing for massive numbers, like one swing, like let's say DPU that swings for like 100k with an Excalibur, where like one Ellie will not be enough. But against a lot of decks, you can just keep recycling that one Ellie for every attack, and then, place another Guardian to boot. Let's see if you don't have more than one Ellie, And so, like, just with that one Ellie, you can still do so much. And so I think banning it is the right call for now. I can see them putting it back to 1 at some point, not to 4, but to 1 at some point, just to see what happens. I'm surprised now they didn't do that, because Bermuda wasn't doing that hot in Premium anymore, so I'm surprised they didn't just go, okay, well, let's put it to 1, see what happens. If it's still a problem, then we'll ban it. But they chose to ban it immediately. Maybe this is what made it delayed to Friday, but I think it's fine, honestly. Like, this ban, I feel, is, like, a lot of people complain about it. I personally think it was also about time that it happens, but as I said, it could have also been to 1. Like, I don't know. I think this one's okay. Anj to 1, though, is interesting. This is the backbone of the deck. This is literally what makes Premium Bermuda shine. So we've seen some decks recently that have gone to, like, the Melody Anj variant, but it's still Anj, like, the whole deck revolves around this card. So not being able to play it at more than 1 copy, not looking too good. I really don't know what Premium Bermuda is going to be looking like. They didn't touch Trois at all, which is, I think, because some people have been experimenting with Melody, and so the fact that they didn't touch Trois is kind of interesting. But like, they could have either touched that and then kept Anj alive, and then Anj players would switch to Melody, or they just kill Anj and make the Bermuda players switch to something else, which is what's going to happen now. So we'll see what happens. Bermuda might just lay dormant in Premium until the next set comes out, which is in just half a year. It's not that long of a period, I think, So yeah, we'll see what happens with Bermuda, but those limits are pretty harsh. The harshest limits in this restriction list are definitely Ichi and Ellie. And so some of them, like I said, the Nubatama one, I just don't really understand why. Same with Magical Calico. And then obviously looking into the future, I already talked about this in Standard, but in Premium, I think, a lot of people have been addressing this. Neo Nectar was not even, like, breathed on. Like, they didn't even glance at it. I think they said that it's on the watch list, but Neo Nectar is completely unchecked. Neo Nectar can run rampant. Neo Nectar is a crazy strong deck. However, no, actually it is checked by one deck, which is Gridora. It's not Luard. Luard does get stomped by this deck, but Gridora does check plants pretty well. I know some really, really good Neo Nectar players will say, well, the Gridora matchup is okay. You can still play around it if you play smart, but I think that the same can be said for really, really good Gridora players. They will know how to play around plants as well, and then be able to, win that matchup regardless. So I think it's interesting because plants will steamroll over everything unless we see more like tanky decks pop up in the meta, which is possible, definitely possible. And then Gridora will check that deck, but then might die to some of the other decks in the meta as well. There's still Luard that, like, Gridora actually has a good matchup against, so it checks that as well. But then there's still stuff like DI, not necessarily that good, stuff like that. And then it's just a lot of random stuff that I don't know if it'll be able to deal with. I think there's still some decks we're forgetting, like Pale Moon. I think is still a very good deck from after Premium Collection that didn't get many results, but I think maybe taking this restriction list into consideration will be able to actually see some results now. Novas, I think, also will be doing better. Plants are not the hottest matchup, but it's still, I think, like, apart from plants, it does well against everything else. It does well against Gridora, etc. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what Premium turns out to be. I don't think it's necessarily just plants and nothing else. I think it's plants, Gridora, and a bunch of other decks that people will be experimenting with. It'll be interesting because this comes into effect September 20th, and I think a few regionals will have ended by then for BCS. But I think almost all of the Europe ones, if not all, will be actually taking place after this restriction list. So that'll be interesting to see how the meta transforms. This is literally a restriction list coming in just for BCS, like just for WGP in Japan and BCS in the West. So it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be a wild ride, but I think that this restriction list overall is good. The only thing lacking is plants. I think they could have touched plants a little bit at least. You know, there are plenty of pieces they could have touched in Neo Nectar. They chose not to. So either we're gonna get an emergency ban list if we have like, you know, top 4 from every BCS is Neo Nectar. We're definitely gonna see an emergency ban list that just goes like, okay, you cannot use like Sylvia and Maiden of Trailing Rose in the same deck or something. Or, you know, Katrina banned or something like that. And so, yeah, I think that it's gonna be an interesting format. I don't think it's super like plants and nothing else. I think that it's gonna be relatively diverse-ish, and some decks have to make big adjustments. As for OTT, I don't know. I mean, OTT was good before New Ichi, but it got much better with New Ichi. And now without this New Ichi, yeah, questionable. So that's it for my discussion on this restriction list. I didn't do predictions because, I mean, I'm just busy. I'm just on holiday. I don't have time for this. But I mean, I didn't want to do predictions because I just felt that it's more effective to do these discussions after the list is out and actually talk about it and, you know, like discuss what's going to happen next and how the meta is going to look and how the game's going to fare. I think it's good that Bushiroad is doing true bans. Like, I think it's good that Bushiroad literally says this card cannot be used. Like, I think that's a good change. Some people are getting mad and saying like, oh, now you're no different than Konami. I don't think it's that. Konami will ban cards just for the sake of money, you know, whereas like they could have easily not banned Ichi because it just came out a couple months ago and they still want to sell premium collection. But they were like, no, the state of the game and the healthiness of the format is more important to us, and so they made this harsh restriction, and so I think it's good. So yeah, I'm personally happy with the way the restriction list is looking. Standard is looking very diverse. Premium will be very interesting to see how diverse it will end up. I think it can sway both ways. I think the creative minds of the game will definitely dictate where the game goes next. So I'm really interested to see how that's gonna go down. So that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. Go check out other people's reactions on the restriction list because I'm sure there's lots of discussion happening. And you know, obviously tell me your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of the fact that they're being so harsh with some of the cards? What do you think of the Nubatama thing? What do you think? Oh, that's the thing I didn't note on yet. The Nubatama thing. So if they restrict something like Nubatama that has 0 results, but they just restrict it because it looks scary, why didn't they restrict Neo Nectar, who also doesn't really have that many results outside of like a team league, but like is clearly a scary deck and a very, you know, like a deck with so much potential. Like, why did they restrict Nubatama but not the other obvious deck that's super strong? So I don't know. I feel like that's a bit strange, but let me know your thoughts on that too. I think there's a lot of discussion to be had here, so let me know in the comments and let's get a bit of a discussion going. So thank you so much for watching. Check out the stuff in the description and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.